Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Grande Prairie District Chamber of Commerce Community Pulse series. My name is Tom Pura, and I try to look after communications and public relations for the Chamber. We acknowledge the Treaty 8 territory, the ancestral and traditional territory of the Cree, Dene, as well as the Métis. We acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis and Inuit, whose footsteps have marked these lands for generations. We recognize the land as an act of reconciliation and gratitude to those whose territory we reside on or are visiting. This session is being recorded to share later, so you do have the option of turning off your camera if you would like to. There will be time for questions at the end, but if something comes to mind, you can type it in the chat box and we will add it to the list. The Grande Prairie area has a robust and diverse economy. The Community Pulse series is designed to provide updates and insights from a variety of industries, sectors, and organizations that make up the fabric of our unique and incredible community. We would like to thank our presenting sponsors, the City of Grande Prairie, the County of Grande Prairie Regional Innovation Network, and TC Energy, as well as our supporting partners, Chambers Plan, represented by local broker Hub International, Community Futures Grande Prairie and Region, Get in the Loop Grande Prairie, and the Municipal District of Greenview. Today, we are highlighting one of our presenting partners, the City of Grande Prairie, and we are pleased to welcome and introduce Chad Sheldon, Economic Development Officer with the City, to give us a brief rundown of their activities.
Thank you, Tom. Are you hearing me okay? Okay, good. Thanks, Tom. So we always appreciate the opportunity to partner with the Chamber, and certainly happy to be part of this Community Pulse series. So good morning, everyone. I'm just introducing myself to those who may not know me. Tom is correct. I am Chad Sheldon, one of the economic development team at the City of Grande Prairie here. And so my main focus is investment attraction and new business development. And because it's what I do, I'm going to get a little plug in here and encourage everyone to learn more about our recently launched Development Incentives and Grants program. So the DIG program you'll hear of, it highlights the city's commitment to supporting our existing businesses and encouraging new businesses. So encourage you to check that out. Go to the website, or even better, call me or stop in at our offices here at Center 2000 anytime. Always happy to chat to you or with you. And again, thanks to the Chamber for including us in this series. And Tom, I'll send it back to you to introduce speakers.
Thanks, Chad. And the timing was perfect because my dog was barking while you were speaking. And so again, you know, sometimes things work out. So appreciate the city's support, and it's a pleasure to work with our partners in economic development for sure. Now to introduce this week's presenter, Jason Krips joined the Alberta Forest Products Association as president and CEO in 2020 after almost 20 years in Alberta public service. He held deputy minister positions with economic development, trade and tourism, and agriculture and forestry. During his tenure with Economic Development, Trade and Tourism, Jason oversaw the operational and strategic development of the ministry and played an important role on trade files, including NAFTA, USMCA, and softwood lumber. He also has a strong background in international relations, previously having oversight of Alberta's international office network and overseeing the opening of Alberta international offices in the ASEAN region and South China. He is a lawyer by training and has been a longtime friend of Alberta Chambers of Commerce. We are pleased to welcome Jason Krips.
Thank you very much, Tom, and good morning, everybody. And hopefully you can hear me okay. Does it sound coming through all right? With that, really thrilled to be here today, and really thrilled for the invite for Chambers. As Tom mentioned, I want to honor the Treaty 8 territory that Grande Prairie and Region and our members in the Grande Prairie region are operating under. I also want to recognize and acknowledge Treaty 6, the territory that I am sitting on in downtown Edmonton, as well as the Métis Nations of Alberta. So really thank the Chamber. Chambers are one of our greatest allies, and we really appreciate everything you do for the community, we do for our sector. As we get started, I just want to point out our new logo. So our very first slide on the very left-hand side, you're actually our very first set of folks to actually see our new logo. We're actually unveiling a bit of a new logo as well as a website this fall as we head into near the end of 2020, and really thrilled the rebrand that we're doing. The designers tell us the logo is meant to represent elements of our industry. If you take a look at it, one way you can see a coniferous tree, or in another way you can actually see a leaf of the deciduous tree. It also can showcase the roof of the top of a home under construction, or if you really look, it would be a stack of paper or a building or a stack of OSB panels. So it depends, I guess, on how many drinks you've had as to what you actually see in the logo. But we're super pumped about it, super pumped about our rebranding with that and the website, and stay tuned for the website rebrand launch later this fall. So we'll just move on to the next slide, slide 2. And Grande Prairie is such an important part of our industry here in the province. And we're very fortunate to have 4 mills, which represents actually in Grande Prairie and Grande Prairie region, which represents our single largest hub in Alberta for forestry. So it's just phenomenally important for us. We're very proud of our history in the community. And the companies have made very long-term investments in Grande Prairie. And in fact, Canfor has been operating continuously in the community since the mid-1950s. Weyerhaeuser has been in the community since 1992. West Fraser and International Paper, I would say, are both relatively newcomers to Grande Prairie, but have an enviable track record in the industry and within North America and the world. In forestry terms, Grande Prairie is unique as a community. There's few places in the world where we have such a concentration of absolute leading forestry companies. International Paper is the largest pulp producer and a company that has been in business since 1898. Weyerhaeuser may be the biggest forest company in the world, but they're also the largest landowner in the United States, and they've been around since 1900. West Fraser is the largest lumber producer in the world, has been around in the world for about a decade, but with their recent purchase of Norbord back in January, they're also now the largest OSB producer in the world. And Canfor is the second largest lumber producer in the world. So just as an aside on Canfor, not everybody's aware of its really unique history. The company was founded in the late 1930s by the Prentice and Bentley families. They were Jewish families who fled the Holocaust in Austria and came to Canada with virtually nothing. They settled into Vancouver and built the company that we know today step by step. It's really an incredible legacy that they've left and are leaving and guiding. So slide 3, speaking of legacies, Weyerhaeuser's operationally recently celebrated the planting of the 250th millionth tree. That works out to about 3,500 trees for every person in Grande Prairie. I was fortunate to be part of the announcement back in August and actually attended the I wouldn't call it sod turning ceremony, but the tree planting ceremony with Weyerhaeuser. Not only that, I actually brought my youngest son up with me, and we were able to stay in Grande Prairie, in the Grande Prairie region for a couple of days. We did a couple of mill tours, both Weyerhaeuser and International Paper, but we actually brought our mountain bikes. And I, just as an aside, have to say how incredibly impressive and beautiful your city is and your region is. Your mountain biking trails are phenomenal. We carved up South Bear Creek trails, got lost a couple of times, but had a lot of fun riding there. So I just want to say that from a recreational hub perspective, Grande Prairie is just an absolute gem, and very much for you to be proud of the recreation and other activities that you enable in your region. So while in Grande Prairie, I had the chance to meet with Mayor Clayton as well as Reeve Beaupre, and they're incredible advocates for your community and our industry, and we're both very lucky to have them. As we move to the next slide, as you know, our industry has been very fortunate throughout COVID. We enjoyed strong product demand and high prices for many of our products. We're happy that forestry was a source of stability for many communities, and I do believe that includes Grande Prairie. In fact, we paid approximately $120 million in wages annually in Grande Prairie. And in addition, forestry also pays this past fiscal year $450 million in royalties to the provincial government here in Alberta. That goes to support roads, hospitals, and other services that we benefit from. And on top of that, there's $73 million in property taxes that go to municipalities around the province because of the forestry sector. We are, as an aside, we're doing an exciting new supply chain economic impact study, which we expect to be ready in the spring. And that'll give us an even better sense of the economic impact on our communities and the importance of not only the direct, indirect, but tertiary businesses that make up the forestry supply chain. So moving on to slide 5, as an association, we're on a journey. Over the last 1.5 to 2 years, we've added 3 new members. So as I mentioned previously, West Fraser bought out Norbord and they merged back in January. So Norbord is now a part of us, and obviously West Fraser active in the region. Mercer joined us about 18 months to 2 years ago in Peace River, and LPAC near Athabasca joined us as well. So really excited to have these new members. It really gives us almost a one window lens through the journey. We're just missing one active member in the province. But our next challenge is to figure out how we fit in with important conversations like carbon, like climate change, like ESG, and changing consumer demands. We believe that we're absolutely part of the solution on climate change and an important vehicle to get Canada to net zero, and whether that's net zero to 2050 or 2035, pick your number. We do believe we're a very important part of that journey for Canada and North America. We're also on an important journey of engagement with Indigenous communities as well. So moving to slide 6, just a little bit about our Love Alberta Forest campaign. Hope many of you have had a chance to see the Love Alberta Forest campaign. It really tells the stories of the communities, of the people. And in the bottom left-hand corner, you can see a picture of the teams at Weyerhaeuser and Canfor pictured in front of the billboard. We believe we've invested heavily in this campaign because we believe in what we do. And we believe we've been too shy in telling our story for too long. So you're going to see more of a regular cadence with our Love Alberta Forest campaign throughout the year. I think we have 4 different slots of buys on an annual basis. And we actually recently had approval to carry out the campaign for the next 3 years after this last year ends. And you should be seeing an increased viewer of this campaign coming up in the next couple of weeks as we head into the end of the September months. Real highlight of the campaign, I'm not sure if you were able to see it, but back in January, we had launched a virtual forest tour narrated by Alberta-born, actually Edmonton-raised Nathan Fillion. We encourage you to check it out if you haven't had a chance. It's really cheeky audio tour, and Nathan just does a fantastic job. And it really tells the story of the importance of the different segments of a forest's life and the importance of harvesting and then replenishing. So in terms of your advocacy, you've really helped us move the needle on some important files. Over the last year and a bit, we were able to get raising permissible heights of wood buildings from 6 stories to 12 stories, means that materials produced in Grande Prairie can be used in multifamily developments right across the province and into the rest of the globe with our reach of the markets. We've also enjoyed strong support from communities in Grande Prairie in particular on Caribou, and more on that in a moment. So we have a great sustainability story, we believe, with the forestry industry. Of the companies operating in Grande Prairie, the youngest in Grande Prairie region being West Fraser, which was established in 1955. I don't think there are many rooms where a 66-year-old company would be the new kid on the block. And with these companies, they're not an anomaly in Alberta. We have independent companies like Miller Western, which has been 100 years in business, Spray Lakes in Cochrane, which is celebrating 80 years. Excuse me, I just need to clear my throat for a moment, so if you can just bear with me, I'm just going to put you on mute. And I'm having audio. My apologies, folks. My screen has just shrunk. If you can just bear with me for 30 seconds. I'm just going to get Brock to help me with my tech issues. Please bear with me one moment.
No worries, Jason. As we all understand, sometimes technology doesn't quite cooperate. If you do have questions for Jason, again, we remind you, you can put them in the chat box. Otherwise, you can also just sort of raise your hand or get our attention, and we can get you to unmute and ask your question. But I think we've got everything back on track, so we'll send it back to Jason.
Thanks, Tom, and really good job of filling the air. That was impressive. I think you've got a future in either radio or TV talk show. So thank you very much for that. As I was saying, you know, we've had some really long-standing companies here in the province. I was just talking about Spray Lakes and Cochrane celebrating 80 years. We have other in the country companies like Boucher Brothers and Zavisha are into the third or fourth generations of ownership from a family perspective. So where I'm going with this is it really speaks to the value that the forestry industry places on sustainability. The reality is that you wouldn't be in business that long if you weren't caring about the land and managing the land properly. So we do feel, with respect to sustainability, we do have a great story to tell on carbon. Most building materials require the emission of large amounts of carbon to manufacture, but not only does wood have a much lower manufacturing footprint, it also sequesters carbon long term. Various organizations around the world have crunched the numbers and come to that same conclusion. And we need forestry if we're going to meet any kind of climate change goals. And this is an important message that we provide and try to amplify to our policymakers. Mentioned Caribou a little bit ago. I just want to touch again on Caribou because I think it relates closely to our sustainability story. Our foresters live in communities like Grande Prairie, and they have a unique understanding of the land and the wildlife. They combine that with a great academic background and practical experience. We've seen this knowledge put to work on the grizzlies, and we've been able to work together with academia, with our companies, and with research as we've managed to drastically increase our grizzly population over the last 30 years. And our solutions work because they were developed by local people who know the land. Our message to Ottawa and decision makers is that the foresters in local communities ought to have a say in how we manage caribou. Top-down solutions imposed from the outside not only threaten their economy, they don't work because they lack that local knowledge, and that we're blessed with actually having just a high degree of knowledge and expertise living in local communities like Grande Prairie that need to feed into helping to manage the species at risk. And we need a solution that takes a multi-species approach. The challenge with the current Species at Risk Act is that it considers species in a very one-off basis. One day we're preserving older forest for caribou, and the next day that forest burns, which impacts the water quality and puts us in a bad spot in the trout recovery and releases carbon into the air as opposed to sequesters. So we believe that this one-off approach doesn't work, and we need to consider the landscape holistically. With a landscape that is continually impacted by fires and mountain pine beetle, the way forward on caribou needs working forests, and we are managed by professional foresters and strategically harvested. And as a business community, we appreciate your continued push to make sure that socioeconomics with respect to caribou and other species at risk are considered in this conversation. Caribou are critically important, but so is the health of your businesses and your community and communities around the province. And we need to get this one right from both an environmental and socioeconomic impact. So finally, some of the areas of concern that we've identified on this slide, there's one that we haven't articulated there, and that's electricity. The electricity file continues to keep us up at night. One of our members told me the other day that their transmissions costs have tripled in the last decade, and a redesign of the transition tariff is currently being contemplated that could see these rates for industrial consumers pushed even higher. So we do see this as a threat to the Alberta's manufacturing sector and something that will disproportionately affect centers like Grande Prairie. So we are working closely with a number of other agencies to really ramp up the advocacy to our provincial decision makers to indicate you need to consult, you need to actually work with us, we need to work with a number of companies to tap the brakes to ensure that any changes to the system is done with the socioeconomic lens and with the lens of ensuring a long-term viability of the businesses and in turn the communities. So with that, Tom, I will turn it back to you for questions. I think I blew through those slides fairly quickly, but just really an ending message is just the importance of we see chambers and communities like Grande Prairie to the forest sector, we're very proud of the work that we have and the companies that we do have in Grande Prairie. And it is such a unique hub for us and such an important hub for the forestry sector, not only for Alberta, but for Canada.
You betcha. I really appreciate that, Jason. And thanks, Brock, as well for getting these the presentation together and providing that information. If there's any one area, I guess, in your mind that is top of the list, we need to really be aware of and get action on, can you single it down to one?
If I was to say one, short term, immediate term is the electricity file. AESO has been looking at doing some tariff redesigns. They did actually, what I would say, punt the football out to October for their application into the AUC, the Alberta Utilities Commission. We really believe that the AESO needs to slow things down, to consult with the company. So if there's one short term, that would be the one. I would say the medium to long term is just our role in the environmental conversations, the sustainability file. We have a great story to tell. Policies done right, we can play in and help reduce the carbon footprint for the country, for the province. Done wrong, it could actually shutter our businesses. So I'd say it's just where the medium to longer term, and I wouldn't say, well, it's a risk, but it's also an opportunity, Tom, is just where we play within the whole sustainability file. And I think we've got such a great story to tell. There's not many natural resource industries that actually sequester carbon, manage the forest properly the way we do. We replant trees. For every tree that we harvest, we replant 2 trees, minimum of 2 trees. And when you look at this past year, we planted over 100 million trees as an industry wide, 90% of those from our members, but over 100 million. So it just showcases the importance of a managed forest and ensuring that we have properly replanting of forests so that the forest can be harvested at the right time, so we keep that carbon sequestered. If you let a forest grow too long and don't manage it appropriately within the proper biology and such, you actually put the forest at risk for mountain pine beetle, for other pests, and wildfire. And we saw this year in particular, the wildfire affected British Columbia that drifted certainly over to Alberta. We didn't have as tough of a year wildfire in Alberta, but we certainly felt the consequences of all the smoke coming in. That smoke is carbon being emitted into the air. So we need to ensure that policymakers know that in order for us to meet our target goals for climate change, that we need to have a properly managed forest, which means harvesting at the right time and replenishing the trees as they're harvested.
We invite you to ask your questions in the chat box. As far as forestry, the sector, does it sometimes get overlooked in the importance of the sector to the whole carbon issue? Everybody talks about the oil and gas industry, but I mean, the forestry sometimes gets maybe a little forgotten, and you have to kind of go, hey, wait a minute, look at us. we've got some good things to contribute here.
You're bang on, Tom, and that's part of our role as AFPA, as an industry association, not only working ourselves but working with other industry associations such as our National Association, the Forest Products Association of Canada, and our brother and sister organizations in British Columbia, BC, British Columbia, Ontario, and Quebec, just amplifying that message, and because decision makers need to know that we can and are a part of the solution, and it can be worked hand in glove with the oil and gas industry, important partners for us. We're on the landscape quite often together, but we do represent a really strong benefit to the climate and reducing carbon. So yeah, sometimes we don't get the attention that we deserve, or we feel that we deserve. I shouldn't say that we deserve, but we feel we deserve. But that's for us to make sure that we amplify. That's why the importance of the Love Alberta Forest campaign really tells the story of the importance of forestry to Alberta, not only to the economy, but to the environment. You're going to see a bit of a nuanced change to our messaging in the Love Alberta Forest campaign as we move into the fall months and into the spring. We are going to be moving to tell that environment story a little bit more strongly so that decision makers and the broader public recognize the importance of the forestry sector to the environment.
Are there parts of the province that maybe don't quite understand or kind of where they see the importance of forestry, just because maybe they don't have necessarily that type of, but I guess it's important for everyone to understand how it all kind of fits into the economic picture.
Absolutely. I would say, forestry in Alberta is predominantly a central and northern, at least from a footprint perspective, industry. But we do have Cochrane. We have got Spray Lakes down in Cochrane, so that's close to Calgary. But that is something we're trying to do, is amplify our message right across the province, including Calgary, because Calgary is an important economic and political center, even though the center of government is here in Edmonton. Calgary represents a very important base for us to play into. And then if you look at the consumer side, and I think, as tough as COVID has been globally, nationally, and locally, there's some really good stories that have come out of the forestry sector from COVID. You take a look at the early runs on toilet paper, no pun intended, that forestry was a key part of the early needs for society as we were heading into the early stages of COVID, and whether that's fiber for masks, whether that's paper towel. So, again, it's up for us as an industry, and then to look at partners such as chambers and the businesses that the chambers represent to help amplify the positive message that we have and the importance of the products that we produce, not only from an economic and environment perspective, but just from a social perspective, the products that we provide for some of the necessities of life for citizens.
Can you talk a little bit more about the whole reforestation and just kind of give us a reminder of how intricate that is? I mean, it is something that has been going on for a long time, but sometimes maybe we take that for granted. As to I know even my daughter tried the tree planting thing at one time, and it's not easy. She didn't last long doing it. I mean, these people are going out there, and then, we heard, an unfortunate incident in the Swan Hills area and that sort of thing. And so, there are dangers involved there. It is so important to, for the future and for, the sustainability, and maybe just give us an idea of where, where that whole, activity is going, and the importance of it to the industry.
Great question, Tom. So we believe we're such a unique industry because we actually think and plan in 200-year blocks. Usually a block is harvested in that 80 to 100-year time frame. But that then forces companies to think in the 200-year time frame as to where they can be harvesting, when, and where. And there's not many industries, I believe, that thinks in that long-term benefit. And so when you're looking at harvesting in that 80 to 100-year time frame for the boreal forest, lots of planning goes into that ahead of time. They determine, the time is right. They have plans that they file with the government, and they work with the government on those plans to make sure that the proper road allowances are built by the companies, and we have the proper permitting, and we're hitting the right timing. And then a year or two ahead of harvested area, you have companies, the company officials go in, they collect tree or seedlings from that area, and then they take those seedlings and they use as silviculture companies to grow seedlings, so that when the harvesting is done, they're actually replanting with trees that were exact same from there. So the next generation of trees. And then they have an obligation. So as I mentioned, we plant a minimum of 2 trees for every tree that's harvested. And then we have an obligation by government regulation for the next 14 years after a tree has actually been replanted, that area is managed for maximum success of growth. So there is lots of planning that goes into it. There's lots of the supply chain that is involved in it. You talked about tree planting. We've have fantastic crews that work really long hours and in sometimes not so hospitable locations to get the trees planted, but they do a fantastic job for us. And what was really interesting and actually unique about certainly the 2020 COVID year, we're still waiting on numbers for 2021, but the 2020 year, we actually increased the number of trees that we actually harvested because of some of the restrictions the camps had put on them from keeping within certain cohorts. So actually the tree planters became even more efficient. So, again, not many places or businesses can say that they increased efficiencies over the COVID timeframe, but it does involve many different facets of the economy. You talked about helicopters, and we unfortunately did lose a helicopter pilot this year, really sad. So it is not, can be very dangerous work. It can be in very, as I mentioned, inhospitable territory, but you have people that are passionate about it, people that love to be in the outdoors and love being with nature. And I hazard to guess, they are one of the most caring people about the environment, because they live it and breathe it and are part of it, not only from a business perspective, but from a recreational perspective. It's been really excellent. I've gotten tons of learnings going out to the different mills and meeting a lot of the trades folks and other folks that work in the mills, because once they're done their work at the mill, they're actually into the forest, they're quadding, they're fishing, they're hunting. Those are folks that are steeped with forestry, not only on their professional lives, but during their downtime as well. So it's very passionate people that work within the sector.
Excellent. We do have a question popped up in the chat box, and it's a word that I am not familiar with. What is the difference between silviculture and forestry?
So silviculture, it's a great question. Thank you for the question. Silviculture is really about the early seedling plantings of seeds for the reharvesting. Forestry is writ large. Forestry represents every part of the forestry sector. At least this is how I frame it in my head. But silviculture is a subset of forestry that actually cares and grows the little seedlings for them to be then replanted after harvesting has occurred in an area.
All right. What's the relationship like with our friends to the south these days, as far as forestry is concerned? I know, I'm sure you probably get that question a few times.
I do. Softwood lumber it certainly is, and I'm sure it's heard by many of your audience, Tom. So we are in what's called the Lumber 5. So we're in the 5th tranche of a softwood lumber dispute with the United States. But believe it or not, it is probably the longest standing trade dispute between Canada and the US. It actually goes back to the late 1800s. But in terms of the modern area, we're into the 5th tranche. We had a softwood lumber agreement in 2006 that expired, I believe, in 2017. And then we've, based on those expirations, we now get annualized tariffs put on us through a process that the Department of Commerce in the United States undertakes. Right now, the percentage of dues that most of our companies are paying that export into the United States are in that 8 to 9% range. That will change as of November of this year. Those percentages go up substantially to about between 19, 21, 22%, and I may be off a little bit, but it is an order of magnitude larger. It's because every year that Department of Commerce reviews an allotted year, it's usually 2 years removed from when it was. And I think that what they call the AR3, or Administrative Review 3 tariffs that'll go into effect in November were based on the 2019 year, which was not a strong year for the market. And in 2020, so next year in 2022, you'll likely see the tariffs reduce, because the tariffs will have been based on the 2020 year, which is a strong market year. Anyway, I'm getting into the weeds a little bit too much, Tom, but long-winded way to say is we are in the softwood lumber dispute. There's lots of different litigation and different trade panels going on for the different streams that have occurred over the last few years. If I was to hazard a guess, negotiations probably won't wrap up until sometime into next year. The U.S. coalition in the United States is very strong. They have lots of authority when it comes to whether or not the U.S. government comes to the table and then agrees to a negotiating position. So we're in for the long haul. We're fortunate that prices did spike quite high in May. Fortunate from a forestry perspective, maybe not so much from a consumer perspective, and those trying to build decks and renovate their homes back in the spring. But that has helped us weather the storm a little bit from the tariffs. But having said that, the United States is still our most important trading market, will always be, like most of the products being sold and manufactured in Canada. But we are in for a long haul. Like I said, the agreement, the last agreement ended in 2017, and we're now at 2021, 4 years into what we would describe as softwood lumber 5, and no near-term end in sight. And at the end of the day, history has shown that the disputes of softwood lumber 4, 3, 2, and 1 have typically not resolved until you actually have the very tops of the governments agreeing that we need to get something resolved. So it needs typically a president to prime minister or senior officials to really say, okay, time is up. There's lots of pressure from our consumers. There's lots of pressure from our companies that we need to actually get a deal done. But that probably won't happen in the very near term. And our experts are telling us probably not until into mid next year will we see any appetite at all for negotiating.
Well, you've been involved with government a long time. You know that sometimes the wheels turn a little slowly at times, but you know, I guess as long as we're still going forward, there's a chance, right?
Exactly.
Another question, back to the replanting idea. Is it true that our current tree planting program can't keep up with demand?
That is something I haven't heard. That's a good question, Tom, and we can certainly take away. My understanding, though, is that given the fact that we were able to plant 100 million trees this past year, showcase that, you know, and that's the largest we've ever produced or, sorry, planted in the province. I think we're meeting the demand, but I certainly will take that away and dig into that a little bit more to see if I can get a little bit more information on that. Appreciate
that. BC, you know, obviously the fire season was just horrible this year. What have you heard from you know, what's going on with the forestry industry in BC, and are there any other challenges over there that you know, maybe even affect you folks here in Alberta?
Great question. We actually had there's a couple of forestry companies in BC that actually had to undertake some curtailment because of the wildfire situations in the province. So that actually affected a little bit of the supply and demand. We were very fortunate in Alberta when you compare ourselves to BC that we got off relatively light on a forest fire perspective, but BC is such an important logistics thoroughfare for us as an industry that the fire at Lillooet actually affected trains going through. And in fact, I think one of the train companies, I think it's CP, actually had to shut down for 24 to 48 hours as they were dealing with the absolute horrific scene in Lillooet. And as a result, we had some logistics backup on products coming in from Alberta. So BC and Alberta, it's a very intricate and lots of synergies between Alberta and BC when it comes to the forestry sector. There's lots of companies that are members that actually operate or are headquartered in British Columbia. So we follow what happens in BC very closely, and it's such an important thoroughfare to both Port of Vancouver and Port of Prince Rupert with our companies use to get our products offshore. Because we did talk a few minutes ago about the importance of the the US market. We also have very important markets in Asia, Japan and China in particular, maybe a little bit less on Korea. And Japan in particular actually purchases really high-end, what's called J-grade product from both BC and Alberta mills. And so those ports become very, very important for us to actually ship our products out overseas. And so when there is a disruption in the supply chain in BC, it certainly ripples over into Alberta for sure, and does some backlogging of some of our products.
That was going to be my next question about potential for opportunities in Asia and other markets overseas, and you know, what sort of products are they looking for? What sort of you know, I think I've seen you know, talk about their different, you know, using wood for building rather than some of the other things that they've used in the past. So it sounds like there are opportunities if we can get product to market.
Absolutely, and Japan, you know, it's such a high-end market. Actually, not only for Alberta lumber and Alberta forest products, but actually other products. It's typically a high-end market overall when you look at agriculture and other products. And what's very fortunate about the productivity and the type of high-end products we're able to produce, for example, in the Grande Prairie area, the high demand into Japan for J-grade products. So it's a very important market. It's a premium market. China is a little bit more bulk-based as opposed to high-end quality-based, but still huge opportunities for us in China. And I still believe, too, if you look at other emerging markets in the ASEAN region, Vietnam, I think there's some opportunities on probably the mid to long-term horizon that we need to be looking at as an industry. But the Asian market is an important one for the forestry sector for Alberta, for sure.
Are there any other international markets that Canada contributes as far as forestry is concerned? I hear a lot about Asia and obviously the US, but are there other markets, or are they sort of served by other forestry type areas?
So if there's any one area that I'd say is emerging, is the ASEAN region I mentioned a few minutes ago. When you look at Vietnam, Singapore, Thailand, Philippines, that would be, again, still Asia-based, but those are, given the growing middle class in those markets, those are areas where I think we've got some opportunities. Europe, I'd say, is probably well established and well served by their own markets, and you have Brazil and Russia that are quite active in the forestry sector. So I'd say in terms of key markets for us, absolutely, you're looking at the United States, Japan, China, and then growing in emerging markets, you're looking into the ASEAN region, Vietnam, Philippines, Singapore, those areas.
Fair enough. Closer to home, have we got a handle on the whole mountain pine beetle thing yet?
Yes and no. We were very fortunate to actually receive some funding from both the federal and provincial government last October, actually would have been almost a year ago. That is to help actually Grande Prairie, Edson, Hinton, actually the mountain parks, Jasper, to manage mountain pine beetle. So it was to the tune of just under $70 million, so not insubstantial. One could argue that it was probably a little bit too little, but it arrived, or too little too late, but it arrived. And we are fortunate that we've had a series of governments here in the province, both federally and provincially, got to give both credit, that they've gotten ahead of some of the catastrophic mountain pine beetle destruction we've seen in BC. Certain BC mills absolutely have to be either recently shuttered or shuttered a little bit ago just because of the devastation of mountain pine beetles. So we had governments that saw that and got ahead and trying to manage it. And I was a part of the update from the provincial government about 3 months ago on how things are happening in mountain pine since the funding has been allotted. And we've actually seen some reduction in certain regions, and we've seen some increase in other regions, but by and large, the funding and the activities that those resources have helped fund are making an impact. We just have to be absolutely diligent. Because we've seen what happens in BC if we don't stay on top of mountain pine beetle.
Yeah, you bet. We talked a little bit, you touched a little bit about lumber costs, and we saw the prices up and down. Can you just sort of explain what causes those fluctuations, and why did we see the spikes that we did this year, at least from the consumer point of view?
Great question, Tom, and we do empathize and sympathize with those that were looking to build decks and renovations back in May, because those were absolute historic highs. I think we reached close to 17,000 or 1,700 to 1,000 board feet, which is an order of magnitude. Just we've never seen those kind of prices before. So there are a number of factors. So lumber and corresponding products are traded on the international market. So it's all market based. You had a number of things colliding at the same time. So last year, in the United States, you actually saw historic mortgage rate lows, and they've maintained a relatively low rates. So that has spurred on interest in new homes, in home purchases, combined with you have a number of millennials leaving their mother and father's nests and actually looking to either build their own homes or enter homes and have some renovations with those homes. And in the United States, we have a historically high age of inventory of housing. So typically policymakers try to have if you're looking at it, the sweet spot is about 25 years of age for housing. In the United States, it's actually about between 40 and 45 years is the age of the housing inventory. So it's an older housing market that needed to, so you're seeing a lot of catch up between people looking to get into new homes. You're seeing millennials leaving the nest. And then on top of that, you actually had the phenomenon that COVID has created, where you're having a lot more people being able to work from where they live, as opposed to having to drive into an downtown office like where we are. Brock and I are here today. And as a result, you're seeing, especially in the United States, folks that could live in New York, but could actually work from wherever, or actually heading out to Sunbelts, and they're building new homes there. So you're seeing a huge stacking of that on top of, sort of from the demand side. On the supply side, you did see some mills in the United States and some in BC have to reduce productivity because of COVID situations that's surrounding by them. You also have some weather phenomenon that sometimes occurs in the south that can reduce some of the supply side for a little bit. So it's a bit of a combination of supply and demand. But having said that, even though prices have kind of come back to what we believe is the new base, you're still going to see strong housing demands for the next 2 to 5 years in the United States, just because of the age of the inventory and the move of the millennials out. So we're actually quite bullish on the forestry sector, not only from the lumber side, but also you look at the pulp side, pulp and paper. Paper last year did take a dive because a lot of people they were working from home as opposed to working for the office, and you had schools closed, so you had a lot of remote learning. So supply side or the demand side of paper went down. But medium to long term, when you look at some opportunities on the bio side and the importance of the pulp sector on the bio side, bioenergy, bioproducts, we're really bullish about, back to that environmental story of, products produced right within the forestry sector can really help the reduction of the environmental footprint, but also create that opportunity on the bio side. So I think we're looking at, give or take some market interruptions. We're seeing some strong positives coming on for the full forestry sector going for the next 2 to 5 years.
To know Indigenous relations, maybe you just talk a little bit about the importance of those partnerships and relationships and to the industry and again to the economy.
We absolutely pride ourselves of our partnerships with Indigenous communities and Indigenous businesses. There's a number of our companies that actually partner up with Indigenous companies, either for transportation purpose or harvesting purposes. There's a number of our companies that have Indigenous employees within their facilities. I think we're stats maybe about 10%. I would say that we need to sharpen our pencil and increase those. I think as society, we're recognizing the importance of us as part of reconciliation. It's not just economic, it's social reconciliation. And we do very much value our partnerships with Indigenous communities, but as an association, we're leaning in more to learn ourselves individually, plus also to support our companies. Case in point, we have established a really strong relationship with an elder here in the Edmonton region, and I had my staff and I did Indigenous awareness training, half-day training with this elder in August, and it was just powerful. So we are trying to learn more and partner more, but it's such an important relationship for the forestry sector in particular, but we can always be doing more.
Relationships with municipalities, you get support from municipalities, and it's important for we talked about the caribou situation and other species protections and that sort of thing. The relationship with municipalities and trying to find that balance between the economy and the wildlife and the forestry, and it's kind of a never-ending story, isn't it?
It is, and I have to a huge shout out to all of the municipal leaders that we work with. And I mentioned Mayor Clayton, Reeve, Beauvray, and we have had a number of municipal leaders help us out on just a ton of different issues. I mentioned electricity earlier. There was a collection of mayors who actually helped with a letter writing campaign on electricity issues into ASO and into Associate Minister Nally's office earlier in the spring. Municipal leaders have always been a strong supporter of the forestry sector, and I'd be remiss if I didn't do another shout out to all of the municipal leaders that are either present on this call, Tom, or those that you network with, because it is such an important, we're an industry that's on the ground predominantly in rural Alberta, and our rural leaders have been nothing but absolute stalwarts in supporting us, supporting the companies, and supporting the industry in both its advocacy and just the on the ground work that they do in the different communities.
I know we've had some ownership changes in our local forestry companies. The interest from these companies in Alberta and the industry, I guess we never really have to worry that there isn't going to be some sort of interest as far as these companies are concerned. And we understand that there's going to be changes from time to time, but no concerns from the association as far as the sustainability of these companies. We're quite proud of our local forestry group, and we definitely don't want to see them going anywhere.
No, it's really neat to see the type of companies that are in the Grande Prairie region from a forestry perspective. As I mentioned at the top of the slide deck presentation, just long-standing companies. We're very bullish on where we're headed. We have a very strong board. The board, what's been really neat for me, coming from government after almost 20 years, and my first foray into industry association life, the strength of this board and the fact that they support each other. There may be, one company may not have an issue that's directly impacting them, but it directly impacts one of the other board members. They will lean in to support them because it's a very collegial industry in that regard. And two, it also, if it's directly impacting one of the companies, it could indirectly impact them. For example, if a sawmill ever went down, that's a ripple effect on pulp, on everything else. So it's a very symbiotic and integrated industry, and they support each other very well, and just blessed to have the great board and board members that we do.
It's been exciting to see some of the activity increasing in the North Piece as well. We're so tied to the entire Peace region, including British Columbia, the northeast part of BC, and of course the North Piece here. And it's good to see some of the increased activity in those areas as well.
Yes, yeah, and it was a real neat eye opener for me. In previous roles, I'd been into Grande Prairie a couple of times, but really hadn't spent the amount of time I did, like I did this past August. And what threw me was how integrated the Grande Prairie region is into the northeast of British Columbia, and how important those regions are in supporting each other. And it's not just forestry; it's obviously broader. But your Grande Prairie region is such an important hub for the province, but it's also such an important hub for Western Canada. When you look at just Grande Prairie, but you bring it into the eastern end of northeast British Columbia as well.
Just have a few minutes left here. One other question kind of popped into my head. I know we've had some school tours of forest areas here in our community, and whether it's in the city or the county especially. Tourism opportunities for forestry. It's kind of maybe a weird question, but I know we have our representative from Grande Prairie Regional Tourism on the call, and of course our municipalities, and we're always looking for tourism opportunities, and maybe there's some in forestry as well.
You know what? We'll take that back and have a conversation with our members, Tom. That's a great question, and I've been fortunate now to get out to about 10 of our mills, and I know a number of our mills used to do regular used to do regular tours, but with COVID, they've had to restrict it. But there's also, you take a look at some of the landscape and the tree planting areas and whether or not there's opportunities from a tourist perspective. We'll take that away and chat, have a conversation with our board on that.
Right on. And boy, this has been great. I'd love to just keep chatting with you, but I want to be respectful of your time and everybody else's time. But again, thank you to you and Brock and the association. I was also excited to see our friend Janice Simpkins join you folks, and you know, Janice also offers some perspective from this area, and it was great to see her become part of the team.
Thank you, Tom. She was an absolute steal, getting her from government. Janice and I worked together in a couple of different iterations in government, and she's taken us to a whole new level. And I will definitely mention the shout out to her. In fact, my next meeting, which Brock's my next meeting, is with Janice. The three of us work very, very closely together, and it's been a great team. We're enjoying what we're doing, and we want to just keep serving our members and serving our industry. And the fact that the Grande Prairie Chamber has been so supportive, and your members and your municipal leaders, just a huge shout out to all of you. And looking forward to getting back up in Grande Prairie. It's funny, when I was there, as I mentioned, I toured warehouse and IP, and when I was talking to our Canfor rep, he said, wait a minute, you were there and you didn't actually visit the Canfor. Time-wise, I couldn't, but I plan to be out there hopefully this fall and touring Canfor, which means opportunities to meet with yourselves, Tom, and others as your schedules allow.
I look forward to that, and yeah, by all means, tell Janice that Tom says hi, and we will we'll go from there. But again,
Sounds
thank
good.
you, Jason, and thank you, Brock. Just a wonderful discussion. We want to thank everyone who participated today as well and supporting our series. We acknowledge all of our presenting partners, the City of Grande Prairie, County of Grande Prairie, Grande Prairie Regional Innovation Network, and TC Energy, and our supporting partners, Chambers Plan, represented by local broker Hub International, Community Futures Grande Prairie and Region, Get in the Loop Grande Prairie, and Municipal District of Greenview. Our next sessions in the Community Pulse series are in September 22nd with the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, September 29th with the Municipal District of Greenview, and October 6th with the County of Grande Prairie. And registration is available on our website, grandeprairiechamber.com. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day and week. And again, thank you for joining us for Community Pulse.